The dog wasn't mourning. He was warning them, and no one was listening. Not at first, not under the low gray sky that pressed down over Arlington like a held breath, where polished boots stood in quiet lines, and a flag folded too neatly rested above a sealed coffin that carried the name Officer Daniel Hayes, 37, decorated, respected, gone too soon. They said, taken in the line of duty, a clean report, a closed case. A story already written before the ground had even been opened, but Rex did not read reports. Rex did not believe in endings that smelled wrong. And from the moment they brought the casket forward, his posture changed, rigid, ears forward, amber eyes fixed not on the ceremony, not on the people, but on the box itself, as if something inside it was still speaking in a language only he could hear, a low growl building in his chest, quiet at first, then deeper, resonant. The kind that used to make grown men pause mid-step during operations, the kind that meant danger, not grief. And yet the handlers tried to calm him. A firm hand on his collar, a whispered command. Easy, Rex, easy. But he would not sit, would not lower his gaze, would not accept the stillness everyone else seemed so ready to accept, because stillness, to him, was never silence, not when there was still a scent, faint but present, beneath the varnish and polished wood, beneath the folded flag, beneath the rituals and the final words, a scent he knew better than his own shadow. Daniel's scent, not fading, not gone, just wrong, thinner, distant, like it had been buried under something it shouldn't be, and Rex stepped forward, one paw, then another, muscles tight, breath steady, until the leash snapped taut and held him back, a sharp correction, a voice behind him muttering that the dog didn't understand, that animals get confused at funerals, that loyalty turns to agitation when routine breaks. But Rex did understand, more than any of them, because weeks ago, under a sky just as gray, Daniel had crouched beside him in the back of a cruiser, one hand resting on Rex's neck, fingers pressing gently into his fur where the old scar ran along his shoulder, the one from a mission they never spoke about. And Daniel had said, quiet, almost like a thought he didn't want anyone else to hear. If anything feels off, you trust your nose. Partner, you don't wait for orders, you don't wait for me. And Rex had leaned into him then, solid, certain, the bond between them forged in moments exactly like that. Moments where instinct mattered more than protocol, where hesitation could cost something you couldn't get back. And now, standing in the hush of a ceremony that felt too final, Rex felt that same pull, that same urgency, only stronger, sharper, cutting through the scent of damp grass and pressed uniforms, cutting through the soft murmur of prayers and the distant echo of a bugle warming up somewhere out of sight. And then it happened, subtle, almost invisible to anyone not looking for it. His growl shifted, not louder, but different, focused, targeted. The signal he had been trained to give when something wasn't just wrong, but hidden, when the threat wasn't in front of you, but concealed beneath layers meant to deceive. And the handler felt it, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, his grip tightening just slightly as Rex leaned forward again, eyes locked on the coffin, unwavering, unblinking, as if the truth inside it was waiting, not to be buried, but to be found. The handler's name was Sergeant Michael Torres, and he had worked with K-9 units long enough to know the difference between noise and meaning, between a dog reacting and a dog communicating, and what Rex was doing now was not confusion. It was precision. It was the same controlled tension he had seen in the field when a hidden threat sat just inches beneath ordinary ground, waiting for the wrong step. And Torres felt a cold line run down his spine as he watched the dog's body align, head low, ears forward, breathing measured, every signal unmistakable. This was an alert, and yet nothing about this place should have triggered one. Not here, not at a ceremony meant to honor a fallen officer, not with a sealed coffin that had already passed inspection, paperwork signed, procedures followed, everything neat, everything official, everything final, and still Rex would not break focus. He shifted his weight forward again, claws scraping softly against the damp earth, a quiet insistence that pulled at Torres harder than any spoken order, and for a moment, the sounds around them seemed to dull, the murmur of voices fading, the distant hum of traffic beyond the cemetery gates dissolving into something hollow, because Torres remembered something most people there did not. He remembered the reports that did not quite settle right, the timeline that had gaps, the recovery that had been described too quickly, too cleanly, as if someone had wanted it closed before questions could form. And he remembered Daniel Hayes, not as a name on a plaque, but as a man who trusted his dog more than his own instincts sometimes. A man who had once said during a training exercise, "If Rex signals, you listen, even if it makes no sense, especially then." And Torres swallowed slowly, his grip loosening just enough on the leash for Rex to take a single step closer, the movement subtle, but intentional. And a nearby officer noticed, a tall man with silver at his temples, Captain Leonard Briggs, who stepped forward with a quiet authority that carried weight without volume. "Keep the dog back, Sergeant," he said, not harsh, but firm, the kind of tone used to maintain order when emotion threatened to disrupt it. But Torres did not respond immediately, because Rex had changed again, the growl fading into something lower, almost like a hum, his nose lifting slightly, drawing in the air. In short, controlled pulls, isolating, confirming. And then he let out a sharp, single bark, not loud, but exact, the kind used to mark a find, not to warn, but to declare. And that was when Torres felt it fully, the realization settling into place with a weight he could not ignore. This was not grief. This was detection. He looked at the coffin, at the flag folded with perfect symmetry, at the polished surface that reflected the gray sky above. And for the first time, it did not look like a resting place. It looked like a container, something holding more than it should. Captain Briggs stepped closer now, his brow tightening slightly as he observed the dog's behavior. "What is wrong with him?" he asked, quieter this time, less command, more question. And Torres finally spoke, his voice steady, but lower than before. "There is nothing wrong with him, sir." And that answer lingered in the air between them, heavy, unfinished, because the implication was already there, unspoken, and around them. A few others had begun to notice the subtle shift in tone, the way the handler had stopped correcting the dog, the way Rex had not once looked away from the coffin, as if everything else had ceased to matter. And the wind moved lightly across the cemetery, brushing against uniforms and carrying with it the faint scent of polished wood, damp grass, and something else, something almost imperceptible, but enough. Enough for a dog who had once saved lives by refusing to ignore what others could not see. And Torres took a breath, slow, deliberate, as he met the captain's eyes. "There is a reason he is alerting," he said, and the words, once spoken, could not be taken back, because now there was only one question left, and it was no longer whether the dog was wrong, but whether they were willing to find out if he was right. Silence does not break all at once. It fractures slowly, like ice under weight, and what had been a ceremony begins to shift into something else entirely, as Captain Briggs studies Torres with a longer gaze, measuring not just the words, but the certainty behind them, because this is no small request, no simple disruption. This is a line being drawn between protocol and instinct, between what is written and what is felt, and the air grows heavier with it. A few steps away, an officer clears his throat as if to restore order, but even that sound fades quickly, because Rex has not moved, not even an inch, his entire body locked toward the coffin, steady, unwavering, patient in the way only something absolutely certain can be. And Torres feels it again, that pull, that quiet pressure that does not shout but does not leave either, the kind that has saved lives in moments when hesitation would have cost everything. And he takes one slow step forward, bringing Rex with him, not forcefully, not dragging, but allowing, as if acknowledging something already decided. "Sir," he says again, softer now, but firmer, "I have seen this before." And Briggs does not interrupt this time, because something in the tone tells him this is not guesswork, this is memory speaking. "What kind of alert is it?" Briggs asks, his voice lower, more controlled, and Torres answers without looking away from the coffin, "Human scent, present, contained, not degraded." And those words land differently. They do not echo loudly, but they settle deep, because everyone there understands what they imply. A coffin is meant to hold what is no longer living, what no longer breathes, what no longer carries scent in a way that can be detected so clearly. And yet Rex is telling them otherwise, not with words, but with something far more difficult to ignore. And a ripple moves through the small crowd, subtle, restrained, but undeniable. One officer shifts his stance. Another glances toward the sealed lid as if seeing it for the first time, and the wind brushes again across the scene, lifting the edge of a flag just slightly before it settles back into place. Neat, respectful, final. Except it does not feel final anymore. Not to Torres, not to Rex, and perhaps not to Briggs either, who now steps closer to the coffin, his eyes narrowing as he studies it, as if expecting it to reveal something on its own, but it remains still, polished, silent, offering nothing. And that silence becomes its own kind of question, because if nothing is wrong, why does it feel like something is? Waiting beneath it, something unfinished, something unresolved, and Rex suddenly shifts again, a small movement, but sharp, his paw lifting and touching the ground just inches from the base of the coffin. Not scratching, not frantic, just marking, precise, deliberate, as if drawing a line only he can see. And then he exhales, slow, controlled, his gaze never breaking, and Torres feels the moment crystallize. This is it. The point where decision replaces doubt, where someone must choose between trusting what they know and trusting what they have been taught to believe. Captain Briggs straightens slightly, his jaw tightening, not in anger, but in thought, in calculation, because whatever happens next cannot be undone. Opening that coffin would break more than protocol. It would break the illusion of certainty that everyone here has been holding on to, and yet leaving it closed now feels heavier, riskier, as if ignoring a warning that has already been clearly given. And Briggs looks at Torres one last time, searching for hesitation, for uncertainty, for anything that might justify stepping back, but he finds none, only a steady resolve mirrored in the posture of the dog beside him. And after a long second that seems to stretch beyond time itself, Briggs turns slightly toward the nearest officer and speaks, quiet, but unmistakable, "Open it." And the words fall into the air with a weight that changes everything. Because now there is no returning to what this moment was before, only moving forward into what it is about to become. The command does not echo, it settles, heavy and irreversible, and for a brief moment no one moves, as if the world itself is deciding whether to follow through. Then one officer steps forward, then another, hands steady but slower than usual, because this is not routine anymore. This is something else, something that sits just outside the edges of what they understand. And the sound begins, faint at first, the soft metallic click of clasps being released, one by one, each snap cutting through the stillness like a quiet question, and Rex goes completely still. No growl now, no bark, just focus, pure and unwavering. His breathing shallow but controlled, eyes locked on the lid as if every second matters, as if whatever is inside is tied to this exact moment. And Torres feels his own breath slow to match the rhythm of the dog beside him. Because there is no turning away now, not for either of them. The final latch releases with a muted sound that seems louder than it should be, and the officer at the head of the coffin hesitates for half a heartbeat, just long enough to feel the weight of what he is about to do, before placing both hands against the polished surface and beginning to lift, slowly, carefully, as if speed itself might break something fragile. And the lid rises inch by inch, the interior still hidden by shadow, and the air seems to shift with it, cooler somehow, thinner, as if the world is leaning in, waiting, and then the opening widens, enough for light to reach inside, enough for shapes to form, and for a second, no one speaks, because what they expect to see and what they are seeing do not immediately align. And then Rex steps forward, just one step, the leash slack now in Torres's hand, and he lowers his head slightly, drawing in a breath that is deeper than before, confirming, and in that quiet motion, something changes, not in the coffin, but in the people around it, because realization does not arrive as a shout. It arrives as a shift, subtle but undeniable. The officer holding the lid freezes, his grip tightening, eyes widening just slightly as he looks down, and Captain Briggs moves closer, not rushing, but no longer holding back, his expression sharpening as he peers inside, searching for clarity in a moment that has already begun to unravel. And Torres follows, one step behind, his pulse steady, but firm, because he knows this feeling, this moment right before truth surfaces, and Rex lets out a soft exhale, not a growl, not a bark, something quieter, almost like relief held back too long. And then it becomes clear, Not all at once, but piece by piece, the details settling into place. The stillness inside the coffin is not complete, not absolute. There is something there that does not belong to silence. Something faint but present, a trace of life where there should be none, and Torres feels it before he fully sees it. That same instinct that had pulled him forward now anchoring him in certainty. And someone behind them whispers, barely audible, as if afraid to disturb whatever fragile truth is unfolding. That is not possible. But possibility has already shifted, already changed shape in the space between belief and evidence. And Rex lifts his head just slightly, his gaze softening for the first time since the ceremony began, the tension in his body easing not into calm, but into confirmation, as if the question that drove him here has finally been answered. And Torres lowers his hand to the dog's neck, not to restrain, but to steady, both of them now standing at the edge of something that no report, no protocol, no prepared speech could have accounted for. Because what lies inside that coffin is no longer just a symbol of loss. It is something unfinished, something that refuses to fit the ending that had already been written for it. For a long second, no one breathes. Not because they are told to be still, but because the moment itself demands it, because what rests inside the coffin does not match the quiet certainty they had all accepted. And Captain Briggs leans in closer, his eyes narrowing as the details settle, the faint rise and fall, so slight it could be mistaken for illusion. But it is not. It is there, fragile, almost hidden beneath layers of stillness. And Torres feels it fully now, the confirmation locking into place with a clarity that leaves no room for doubt. He was never gone, not completely, not in the way they believed. And Rex steps forward again, closer this time, until his nose reaches the edge of the coffin, and he inhales once, deep and steady, then exhales slowly, a soft sound escaping him, not tension, not warning, but something closer to relief, as if the weight he carried has finally been set down. And Torres places a hand gently along the dog's neck, feeling the subtle shift in muscle, the release of pressure that only comes when a mission is complete. And around them, the silence begins to crack, not loudly, but in small, human ways, a sharp intake of breath, a whispered word that does not fully form, a step backward as reality rearranges itself in real time. And one of the officers nearest the coffin looks up at Briggs, his voice unsteady but controlled. "Sir," he says, barely above a whisper, "we need medical support." And the word need carries more than urgency. It carries the understanding that this is no longer ceremonial. This is immediate. This is now. And Briggs does not hesitate. Not anymore. Whatever doubt had lingered has been replaced by something sharper, more focused. He nods once. "Firm. Call it in," he says, and the command moves quickly, passed from one voice to another, quiet but efficient, the way trained people respond when something shifts from unexpected to critical. And yet even as motion begins around them, Rex does not move away. He remains there, steady, his gaze fixed not on the crowd, not on the activity now unfolding, but on Daniel, because to him, this was never about the ceremony, never about the protocol. It was about the truth of ascent, the presence of something that refused to disappear. And Torres watches the dog for a moment longer, then looks down into the coffin again. And this time he sees more clearly, not just the faint movement, but the story behind it, the way something had been missed, overlooked, perhaps rushed, and a quiet thought crosses his mind. Not loud, not accusatory, just present. How close they had come to sealing a mistake beneath the ground. How close they had come to letting silence win. And he feels a subtle tightening in his chest at that realization. Not fear, not anger, but something heavier, something that settles deeper than either. And beside him, Briggs stands still for a moment longer before stepping back slightly, giving space now not out of distance, but out of respect for what is unfolding. And the sound of approaching sirens begins to rise in the distance, faint at first, then gradually clearer, threading its way through the quiet of the cemetery. And Rex finally shifts his posture, not away, but lower, easing himself gently down beside the coffin, his body close, his head resting near the edge, as if guarding, as if staying exactly where he is needed. And Torres exhales slowly, his hand still resting against the dog. And for the first time since this began, he allows himself to think it fully, not just feel it. That this moment, This entire unraveling exists because one animal refused to accept what did not feel right, because one instinct was trusted, even when it challenged everything else. And as the sirens draw nearer, cutting softly through the gray air, the line between what was believed and what is real stands fully revealed, not in words, not in reports, but in the quiet, undeniable presence of a life that had not yet let go. The sirens arrive not as noise, but as a shift in rhythm, cutting through the stillness with a steady urgency that pulls everyone back into motion and within. Moments the quiet order of the ceremony transforms into something purposeful, controlled, precise. Medics moving with practiced efficiency across the damp grass, their boots pressing into the earth that had almost been used for something final, and now becomes the ground of something else entirely, something unfinished and fragile. And Torres steps aside just enough to give them space. But Rex does not move, not at first. His body still anchored beside the coffin, his head lifted slightly now, watching every motion with the same focus he had held from the beginning. As if this too is part of the same task, not yet complete, not until the outcome is certain, and one of the medics kneels beside the open coffin, hands careful, deliberate, checking, confirming, speaking in low tones that carry meaning without needing volume. We have a pulse, faint but present, and those words travel through the air like something almost sacred, something that reshapes everything it touches, and Torres closes his eyes for just a brief second, not in disbelief, but in acknowledgement, because now it is no longer instinct alone, now it is fact, and Captain Briggs exhales slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something steadier, more grounded, as he watches the medics begin their work, their movements precise, measured, each step taken with the awareness that time matters in ways it did not just minutes ago. And Rex finally moves, not away, but closer in a different way, easing himself forward until he is just within reach of the edge, his nose lifting slightly as if to confirm once more. And then he lowers his head again, resting it gently, not touching, but near, close enough to feel, to stay connected, and Torres kneels beside him, his hand returning to the dog's neck, fingers pressing lightly into the fur, grounding both of them in this moment that feels both immediate and unreal. And for a brief instant, something shifts in the man inside the coffin, subtle, barely visible, but enough for Rex to notice, enough for his ears to twitch forward, his body tensing just slightly before settling again. And Torres sees it too now, not just the presence of life, but the fragile movement of it, the quiet resistance against an ending that had come too soon. And around them the world continues to adjust, officers stepping back, creating space, voices low, controlled, respectful, not of ceremony now, but of something more delicate, something that requires care rather than formality. And Briggs turns slightly, issuing quiet instructions that carry authority without disrupting the moment. Clear the area, give them room, keep it contained, because even now, even in this unfolding, there is a need to protect what is happening, to shield it from confusion, from noise, from anything that might pull it away from the narrow path it now walks between uncertainty and recovery. And the medics begin preparing to move, their actions smooth, coordinated, transferring carefully, ensuring stability, their focus absolute. And as they work, one of them glances briefly at Torres, then at Rex, a flicker of understanding passing between them, because even in a field built on training and protocol, there is recognition when something beyond that has guided the outcome, and Rex remains where he is until the last possible second, until the movement begins, until the connection shifts from stillness to motion, and only then does he rise, slow, controlled, stepping back just enough to allow the path forward, his eyes never leaving Daniel, not as a name, not as a memory, but as something present, something still here. And Torres stands with him, his hand resting briefly against the dog's shoulder. And as the stretcher is carried forward and the sirens soften into the distance once more, there is a quiet understanding that settles over the scene, not spoken, not written, but felt, that what was nearly lost has been returned, not by chance, not by timing, but by a refusal to ignore what did not feel right, by a loyalty that did not accept silence as truth. And as the last echoes of urgency fade into the gray morning, Rex watches until the very end. Steady, calm, no longer warning, no longer searching, but simply staying, as he always had, exactly where he was needed. The cemetery does not return to what it was, not immediately, because once something breaks open like that, once certainty gives way to truth, the air carries it for a while, like a quiet echo that refuses to fade, and long after the ambulance has disappeared beyond the iron gates, the people who remain stand differently, not in formation, not in ceremony, but in reflection, each one holding a piece of what just happened, trying to place it somewhere that makes sense. And Captain Briggs remains near the open coffin, his gaze resting on it not as an object, but as a question, one that no longer needs asking. And beside him, Sergeant Torres stands with Rex, both of them still, both of them watching the empty space where Daniel had been moments ago, as if the absence itself carries meaning now. And Rex shifts his weight slightly, his ears relaxing for the first time, the tension fully gone from his frame, replaced by something quieter, steadier, the kind of calm that follows completion. And Torres feels it through his hand, still resting against the dog's shoulder, a silent confirmation that the task, whatever it truly was, has been fulfilled. And for a moment, neither of them moves, because there is no urgency left, only understanding. And Briggs finally exhales, slow and measured, before turning toward Torres, his voice lower now, stripped of command, carrying something closer to respect. "You trusted him," he says, not as a question, but as recognition. And Torres nods once, simple, direct, because there is nothing more to explain, nothing more to justify. And Briggs glances down at Rex, studying him not as an animal, not as a tool, but as something else entirely, something that stands at the edge of instinct and something deeper, something harder to name. And the wind moves again across the open space, lifting the edge of the flag that had been set aside, its fabric catching the light briefly before settling once more, no longer marking an ending, but something paused, something unfinished. And in that quiet, another officer approaches, hesitant, as if stepping into a moment that still feels fragile. "Sir," he says to Briggs, "what do we report?" And the question lingers, not because there is no answer, but because the answer is not simple. It does not fit into the clean lines of paperwork or procedure. It does not translate easily into the language of reports. And Briggs looks back at the coffin, then at Torres, then at Rex, and for a second, the weight of that question settles fully. Before he speaks, "We report the truth," he says finally, calm, steady. And in those words there is a shift, not just in this moment, but in what will follow it, because truth, once acknowledged, does not return to silence. And Torres gives a slight nod, not in agreement, but in understanding, because that is all that has ever mattered, not the protocol, not the expectation, but the truth of what is present. And Rex lifts his head slightly, his gaze moving briefly toward Torres, then back toward the path where Daniel had been taken, as if tracking something beyond sight, something felt rather than seen. And Torres follows that gaze for a moment, then looks down at the dog, a faint breath leaving him, almost a quiet laugh, but softer, heavier. "You knew," he murmurs, not expecting a response, not needing one. And Rex does not move, does not react, because he has already answered in the only way he knows how, through action, through presence, through refusal to ignore what others might overlook. And the cemetery begins to settle again, not back into what it was, but into something altered, something aware, the officers slowly dispersing, their movements quieter, more thoughtful, as if each step carries a new understanding. And Briggs remains where he is for a moment longer before turning away, his posture straighter, but his expression changed, less rigid, more human. And Torres finally steps back, guiding Rex gently with him, not pulling, not commanding, just moving together, side by side, as they leave the space that almost became an ending. And as they walk, the sound of their footsteps soft against the damp ground, there is a quiet certainty that follows them, not loud, not declared, but steady. That's sometimes the line between life and loss is thinner than anyone realizes. And sometimes it takes something without words, without doubt, to stand in that space and refuse to let it close too soon. The hospital does not feel like a place of answers at first. It feels like a place of waiting, long hallways washed in pale light, the faint scent of antiseptic and quiet machines filling the air, and Sergeant Torres stands near the far wall of the emergency wing, arms folded loosely, not tense, not relaxed, just present, while Rex sits beside him, calm now, but not detached, his ears shifting slightly at every passing sound, tracking, listening, as if the world has not fully settled yet, as if something important is still unfolding. Just beyond the doors marked with restricted access, and time moves differently here, not in minutes or hours, but in breaths, in footsteps, in the quiet exchange of glances between staff who understand more than they say. And Torres watches it all without speaking, because there is nothing to add, nothing to rush, only to witness. And across the room, Captain Briggs leans against a chair, his posture less rigid than before, his uniform still sharp, but his presence softer, as if something inside him has shifted in a way that cannot be reversed. And every now and then, his eyes move toward Rex, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of acknowledgement, because whatever happened back there did not stay behind. It followed them here. It sits with them now in the silence between updates, and Rex lifts his head suddenly, not sharply, but with purpose, his gaze turning toward the double doors just seconds before they open. And a doctor steps out, mid-50s, composed, but carrying that familiar look of someone who has just stepped out of something delicate, something that required precision and patience. And Briggs straightens slightly, pushing himself off the chair as he approaches, his voice low, controlled. "How is he?" And the doctor pauses for just a moment, not hesitating, but choosing his words carefully. "Stable," he says, still weak, but responsive, and those words land gently, not like a victory, not like relief that bursts, but like something steady, something earned. And Torres exhales slowly, the tension he had not acknowledged easing just slightly in his chest, while Rex remains still, watching, as if the confirmation was expected, as if this outcome had already been decided long before anyone else believed it. And the doctor continues, explaining in measured tones. There were signs, subtle ones, easy to miss under certain conditions, but not gone, not absent, just quiet. And Briggs nods once, absorbing it, not questioning, not challenging, because the explanation matters less than the result. And for a moment, no one speaks, not because there is nothing to say, but because the weight of what almost happened still lingers, still settles into the spaces between them. And Rex finally shifts, rising slowly to his feet, his body relaxed, his tail low but steady, and he takes a few quiet steps toward the doors, stopping just short, not pushing, not demanding, just waiting. And Torres watches him, a faint expression crossing his face, something close to understanding, something deeper than words. And after a moment, a nurse appears, glancing between them before offering a small nod. "Just for a minute," she says, "and that is enough." Torres moves forward, Rex beside him, both of them stepping into the quiet room beyond, where the light is softer, where the machines hum in low, steady rhythms. And there, on the bed, lies Daniel Hayes, no longer a name on a report, no longer a sealed certainty, but a presence, fragile, real, his breathing shallow but steady, his face pale but unmistakably his. And Rex approaches slowly, carefully, each step measured, until he reaches the side of the bed. And for a moment, he simply stands there, looking, not searching anymore, not questioning, just seeing. And then, gently, he lowers his head, resting it near Daniel's arm, close enough to feel, to confirm, to stay. And Daniel's fingers move, just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough for contact, enough for connection. And in that small, quiet moment, without words, without ceremony, something completes itself, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the simplest way possible, through presence, through touch, through the quiet certainty that neither of them had let go, even when everything else said they should. Morning arrives quietly, not with brightness, but with a soft gray light that filters through the hospital window, touching everything with a kind of gentle patience. And Daniel Hayes lies still, but not absent, his breathing steadier now, deeper than before, each rise and fall no longer fragile, but rebuilding. And beside him, Rex has not moved far, resting on the floor near the bed, his body relaxed, but his presence unwavering, as if the line he drew in the cemetery still extends here, still holds. And Sergeant Torres stands by the window, watching the city wake slowly beyond the glass, cars moving in distant patterns, people beginning their day unaware of how close something came to ending differently. And behind him, Captain Briggs steps into the room, quieter than usual, his footsteps measured, not wanting to disturb what feels almost sacred. And for a moment, the two men say nothing, because there is nothing urgent left to say, only the weight of what has passed. And Briggs finally speaks, his voice low, reflective. I have seen a lot in this job, but not this. And Torres nods slightly, not turning, because he understands that feeling, that quiet shift when something challenges the way you believe the world worked. And Rex lifts his head just enough to acknowledge the movement, his eyes moving briefly toward Briggs before returning to Daniel, as if keeping watch without effort, without strain, just because it is who he is. And Daniel's hand shifts again, more than before now, fingers curling slightly, searching, and this time Rex responds, not with urgency, not with alarm, but with calm certainty, rising slowly, stepping closer, until his head rests gently against Daniel's arm once more, and the contact is enough for recognition, enough for connection, and Daniel's eyes open just slightly, not fully, not clearly, but enough to sense, enough to feel that he is not alone, and his fingers tighten just a fraction against Rex's fur, a movement so small it might be missed by anyone not looking. But Rex does not miss it, he never would, and Torres turns then, watching the moment unfold with a quiet stillness, because there is no need to interrupt it, no need to speak into something that is already complete in its own way. And Briggs stands beside him, his expression softer now, less guarded, more human, as he watches too, and after a moment, he exhales slowly, almost like a release of something he had been holding without realizing it. And the room settles into a different kind of silence, not the heavy silence of uncertainty, but the lighter kind, the kind that follows when something has been restored, when something that almost slipped away has been gently brought back. And outside, the light grows a little stronger, pushing through the gray, touching the edges of the room with quiet warmth. And Rex remains where he is, steady, grounded, no longer warning, no longer searching, just staying. And Torres steps closer, placing a hand briefly on the dog's shoulder, not as a command, not as a correction, but as acknowledgement. And for a moment, all three remain there, man, dog, and the quiet space between them, connected not by words, not by explanation, but by something simpler, something that does not need to be understood to be real. And as the morning continues to unfold beyond the glass, there is a quiet truth that settles into the room, not spoken, not written, but felt in every small movement, every steady breath, that sometimes the difference between loss and life is not loud, not dramatic, but carried in something as simple as a refusal to walk away. And sometimes that refusal has 4 legs, steady eyes, and a loyalty that does not listen when the world says it is time to let go.